we need to wrap up some chapter 20 stuff and 20 appendix, which is a very short appendix on interest rate parity. So that's my objectives today. And
when are those two chapters going to be due online?
Those are this Sunday.
Both of them?
Oh, what chapter?
Like chapter 20.
20's this Sunday.
And 21 will be just
the fall. Yeah, the whatever. It's scheduled in there. Whatever I got. I think I have it for that Sunday night we just talked about actually. Oh, that's right. I bumped it to Monday because it was the last day of class, so that works out pretty good.
So what time on the 26th? Sunday?
11:59.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the thing we left off with, seems like eons ago, was long run changes in the exchange rate. And so today we're going to look at short run changes in E. Okay, so we're going to get back to a supply-demand framework. And here we're measuring the quantity of dollar assets, the way this textbook does it. And so these are dollar-denominated assets. We're trying to think of foreign exchange, of course. So the way this textbook does it is a little different than what I've seen. So in other applications of this, they have a supply curve that looks like this. So I want to think about why. Why would they assume a supply curve like that? It's at a point in time, a relatively short period of time, since we're thinking about short run, and we're thinking about dollars available at different exchange rates. And so if you kind of think about this one, like I said, it's a little bit weird. On other applications, I've seen them do the foreign exchange market. Here, we're really talking about all dollars.
So it's basically a money supply.
It's kind of a demand curve, figure everything out. Hey, that came. Yeah, you're gonna be turning a little bit, but all right. So the thought here kind of makes sense in this context, though. It's like if I want to buy dollars and I'm a foreigner, right? So I'm one of the demanders for dollars, and I could go out and buy all of them. What's going to happen if you want to buy a whole bunch of dollars, like really just buy billions and billions and billions of dollars, like you're a major super rich guy, the controller of the universe? What's going to happen to the exchange rate? Is it possible, first of all, to go and start buying up lots and lots of dollars? Yeah, you can. So it's possible that the supply is basically fixed at the amount of dollars that are out there. And so we're just kind of sweeping this under the rug a little bit, but that's the logic, is that, well, let's just treat the supply curve as fixed, especially in the short run at a given point in time, fairly short run effects. Let's just take the supply curve as fixed, and then we've got the demand curve that's going to do the work for us in terms of exchange rate determination. I brought the golf club today. We haven't used the club too much for this particular class. So now as demand increases, demand decreases, we start to get movements in the exchange rate. If demand increases to the right, what's happening? Appreciation or depreciation? Appreciation is a good answer. Probably not the best answer. Appreciation in what context? Somebody other than John. Yeah, but I want to say appreciation of what? Of the dollar if we're measuring dollar assets down here, right? So that's the thing I wanted to call to your attention is, remember, it depends on how we define E. So over here, E is the exchange rate, and we are, because of the way we're showing the exchange rate here in this context, it's important to remember that this is euros per dollar, or whatever we're talking about per dollar. And therefore, if indeed demand goes up and the exchange rate increases from this level, if this is E1 and it goes up to E2, that is an appreciation of the dollar, depreciation of the other currency. Okay, so that's our setup for the market. And we're going to work through a number of variables that influence the price of money, chapter 20. Yep. So these are basically a list of shifters. A good old-fashioned shifter list here. So one is the domestic interest rate, script D. Again, the domestic country in this context, we're measuring dollars down here, so we're treating them as the domestic country. And if there's an increase in the domestic interest rate, what happens to the demand curve? Shifts to the right. Good. Why? That's correct.
Because if you can get a...
Hold on, let me come back to Jason for a sec. Jason, you want to take a stab? You are correct, so have confidence. If the interest rates domestically are higher, why would the demand curve for dollars shift to the right? What's the logic? Yeah, but what is the interest rate on? Somebody else? What is this interest rate on? The domestic interest rate is what? What is that influencing, or what's the underlying thing?
It's your Dave Ramsey mutual fund.
Possibly Dave Ramsey mutual fund, right? Bonds, other. It's the rate of return on U.S. dollar denominated financial assets. So that's the distinction here with interest rates, is that we're really talking about dollar denominated financial assets, financial securities. So if the interest rate domestically increases, people want to buy more of those. And in order to do so, if you're living over in China, you need dollars to buy dollar-denominated financial securities, right? So that'll lead to an increase in the demand and an appreciation of the exchange rate. So an increase in demand, this will be a shift to the right, as always, in my class anyway. A shift to the right, which leads to appreciation of the dollar, or dollar appreciation. Maybe I'll sneak a little dollar sign in there. Up arrow on the E is dollar appreciation. That's in your notes from last time when we kind of worked through that a little more carefully. Okay, number 2, foreign interest rate. Foreign interest rate, which we're going to use I superscript F. If there's an increase in the foreign interest rate, so now maybe German financial assets seem to be growing. What's going to happen, Jesse? Demand goes down. So the opposite direction. We're not going to be buying any more dollars. Our demand for dollars went down. We've got kind of the substitution effect. So we're just going to start to buy the other one, and that'll lead to a depreciation of the dollar. Number 3, the expected domestic, I'm just going to put DOM, domestic price level. The expected domestic price level. So if there's an increase in the domestic price level, what's going to happen?
You want a different currency, so your demand will go down.
Yes, that's one way to word it. And how else could you be thinking about it if the price level is higher in the domestic country from the other countries, right? So there's kind of a couple different ways. So our prices are rising relative to other countries because there's always the ceteris paribus, hiding behind these up arrows and down arrows, right? So holding the other foreigners' countries' current or price level constant, then we're having some inflation, and that causes our things to be more expensive, and that'll cause a decrease in demand. I want to put one extra note on here. This was expected. I kind of hate to put another like E here, but that's really expected. I want to put a little note that we'll kind of come back to later. The old Fisher formula is what? No, not inflation, unemployment. That would be Phillips curve.
Yeah. Price level old minus price level new minus price level old over price level old.
That's inflation, yes. The new minus the old divided by the old.
Nominal interest rate minus real interest rate.
Good. Okay, or we can flip this around and say the real rate of return on our investment is equal to the nominal rate minus the inflation rate. Okay, good. And so in this context, since we're kind of being forward-looking again, we're going to look at, this particular shift variable here is expected domestic price level, which is the expected inflation rate, right? So this went up, the new went up, causing our inflation expectation to be higher, causing this to be lower, right? Because we know this, like what is the interest rate today? Like today I can engage in a contract for a bond that's a 5-year bond. I know what this is. This one takes some forecasting, right? Because we don't know where that's going to be, but I know it's going to affect my overall return down the road. And therefore, the Fisher formula gets adapted with the expectations this way. I know this with certainty today, but the return's going to be to be. Okay, and so that kind of plays right into this scenario too. If my real expected return is falling because of higher expected inflation, then I'm not going to be buying those bonds or those things. Okay, good. Number 4. Number 4 we kind of talked about with the long term as well, so this one's about the same. But number 4 is expected trade barriers. I don't know if we'll get time today, but I went to an interesting talk on some trade barriers with anti-dumping that maybe if we have time at the end, I'll share with you. I might even talk about it now. So trade barriers we did last time was quotas. What else? Tariffs, quotas, standards, regulations, right? So all of those could be potentially trade barriers. Well, what this research paper did was showed a correlation between anti-dumping lawsuits. So dumping is where a company dumps it on a foreigner at low cost, potentially below cost, to drive the competitor away. And that's anti-competitive if you're kind of flexing your muscle because you're a big company and there's a new startup company that has something that's a substitute. And one way to squash them like a little ant is to just dump our product on the market and nobody will take the new person's, right? So that's the idea of dumping. So what he found was that when trade barriers got reduced, which they've been doing, that the anti-dumping lawsuits spiked or went up, which in itself is kind of a trade barrier, but it's initiated by the people who are getting hurt. And so if the country is in favor of the domestic one that's crying foul about the anti-dumping suit, then they can do a countervailing duty. They can basically raise a tariff and kind of protect the domestic country. And so it was kind of interesting insight on how even as we reduce trade barriers, which is what economists would like to see done, we might have other human action that gets put into place that creates new ones. And in this case, it was the lawsuit. So, so with trade barriers, if there's an increase in the trade barriers expected, that's our variable, expected trade barriers. This one might seem a little odd. But it leads to an appreciation, an increase in demand. So I'm going to write it out and then talk about it. So an appreciation of the currency. Was that counterintuitive to what you thought it might be? If there was trade barriers to be expected? So the key, to me, that one was a little bit weird. I had to put a little brain power into rationalizing this one. Part of it comes due to our setup, the way we have it here. But so the kind of the key point is that the trade barriers, there's an increase in the domestic prices due to barriers. And this leads to, and this leads to effective increases in the foreigner's price when the country is large. And I kind of told you they don't go into this detail. I'm hoping it helps clarify rather than detract from your understanding here. But so with the large country case, if we have our prices going up, and we did touch on this in your notes from the long-term one as well, we're going to put extra pressure around the world with our higher prices, which will cause the foreigner's price to rise and through the changes in the exchange rate. Okay, I'm going to jump down to this one. 5, expected export demand. Expected export demand. If there is an increase in expected export demand, kind of got to put the right hat on again. So we're the domestic country. We're talking about the United States exports. If there's an increase in expected exports, what happens over here in this world? Demand will go up, and why? Michael?
Because people have to actually buy dollars in order to purchase.
Okay, good. So the money follows the goods. Similar to what we did with the interest rate. here we were talking about financial securities. In order to buy US dollar denominated financial assets, you had to get dollars. So if you want to buy chopsticks, if the Chinese want to buy chopsticks from us, they also have to get dollars, and that'll cause an increase in demand and appreciation of the dollar. Okay, number 6 is expected import demand. I took these out of order of how the textbook had them, because I think this one's a little counterintuitive as well, but I think putting the export first helps it. So ID, expected. So what's a little counterintuitive with this one, with this setup, is that when we're importing stuff, Americans are supplying dollars, in my mind anyway, right? They're kind of supplying dollars to the foreign exchange market. We're not allowing that mechanism in this particular setup to go on because we don't have that modeled here. So otherwise, I would say supply curve moves to the right, we get some depreciation. So how it's shown here is through, I think the easiest way to think about it is through the net export demand. And so if we think about this kind of new variable here, export demand minus import demand. So I've kind of created a new variable, which would be net export demand, right? So it's our exports minus our imports is what I'm thinking about. And the reason I did this one first is that this is the chain of events for this variable. And then the other way kind of undoes it. So if there's an increase in this, then we follow this chain of events. Right? So first notice that this thing increasing follows number 5. Same as number 5. For this one then, if there is an increase, and then we can put the little, I left them off, I was going to add them before I moved on. Just change those to expectations. Expected export demand, expected import demand. So if there's an increase in the import demand expected, what happens to this expression? It goes down. And then that gives us the chain of events that makes sense for it, thinking of this net way. So if there's an increase in import demand, that leads to a decrease in the difference, which leads to a decrease in demand and depreciation of the exchange rate. Okay, last one. Expected productivity. What are we on? Number 7. Expected productivity. So, like we did before, this was on the long run one also. What's productivity again? So I'd like econ majors to know pretty quickly after they digest it. What? Output per input. Good. So we can kind of think mathematically about it. How many units of output do I get per unit of input? And so if an hour of labor you can make 100 hamburgers, that's your productivity. If you now can do 110 hamburgers in 1 hour, then your productivity is increased. So an increase in the productivity expected, increased productivity, what will that tend to do to prices? If you become more productive, prices fall because costs fall, right? So if you're more productive, if you can get more out of 1 hour of labor than somebody else, then our average cost per unit starts to fall. So as costs fall, then we can be more competitive, so to speak, on price and undercut our competitors. So prices start to fall domestically. So that's kind of the key link here. Once there's a decrease in the domestic price, then our stuff looks better relative to the world, and so other people want to buy it. There's an increase in demand for our currency in order to buy our stuff. So this is similar to the price level argument. Our stuff is cheaper than rho, the rest of the world, and that leads to a stronger dollar appreciation. Okay. So questions there at all? Those are kind of here's the shifters. Know them, love them, learn them. The next thing I want to look at is interest parity. What was purchasing power parity? Purchasing power parity.
Price of a good in one country relative to another is more or less the same. One good costs the same.
Okay. Good. So that was kind of our start to it. So what John said is technically more like the law of one price if we're talking about the exact same good, zero transaction costs, other things. So who can add on, somebody other than John, what else was brought into the picture that kind of made purchasing power parity slightly different than the law of one price? Yes, that's part of it. There was another essential part that made it slightly different. What's that? It's close to even, but not there. And so the reason is why. How do we generalize the John brought up the law of one price. If I have a thumb drive or a marker that's identical and there's zero transaction costs or whatever, we said that the exchange rate would adjust such that the marker would effectively be the same price whether you're in Australia or whether you're in the United States. That was a law of one price. Purchasing power parity generalizes that concept by...
Where one good can get you the same thing in another country. Is that what you're talking about?
No. I want to generalize it to being a little bit broader. It's where we talked about the real exchange rate.
Yeah, where we talked about the goods.
The price level, good. So we generalize it to the price level. And why is that conceptually quite a bit different? If we're talking maybe Australia and the United States, when we generalize it to the price level compared to identical goods in identical countries, what's some of the material differences there? By bringing in the price level, what is the price level attached to? In part, yeah. Keep going. What else? Inflation. Inflation of what?
The currency of where the country is.
Not so much the currency, because the price level, how we create the price level is by doing what?
Prices.
Prices of what?
Prices of goods.
Of what goods?
In your basket.
In your basket. That's kind of what I wanted to look for. So conceptually, this is a little different. We're taking all goods and what else? Goods and services. Services that may not really be able to be exported over to another country. So the material difference between purchasing power parity and the law of one price is that we're introducing baskets of goods that are going to be different for sure in both countries. And so when we take the relative price levels, it tells us how exchange rates should move over the long run. But in the short run, we need to go back to these 7 things. So that's why we did kind of the long run, short run distinction. Okay, good. Any last comments or questions, clarification on PPP? That's one of the most important laws in international. So it's generalized to the price level, which then compares basket of goods, which are expected to be fundamentally different. We don't have identical baskets in each country. Okay. Chelsea, did you have something? No? All right, so let me go ahead and put, this is appendix for chapter 20. It's only like 2.5 pages or 3 pages. And this is interest rate parity. So it's similar in concept to purchasing power parity, PPP, except it deals with interest rates. So, for example, suppose we have Germans with euros and Americans with dollars. What does dollar appreciation look like? In fact, let me add, I'll just cut kind of somewhat to the chase here. We could do it in a couple ways, but how about expected dollar appreciation? What does that formula look like? Appreciation of the dollar. I'll give you a hint. We had a very similar formula on the board within the last 20 minutes, but I think I erased it.
Fisher formula.
Nope. Good. New minus the old divided by the old, yes. So that's just our rate of change formula. And in this case, the price is the price of the currency. And so since we're dealing with dollars here, it is E t plus 1. It's expected E, so we're going to superscript that to E. It's the expected t plus 1 exchange rate minus the spot rate today, ET, divided by ET. So it's just new number minus old number divided by old number. Same old thing we've always had. So what do things look like for the German? So for the German, the return on the return of dollar assets in euros, because that's what he ultimately cares about. So we're going to call that RD. His return on euros is the domestic interest rate, United States, and then we got to factor dollar appreciation. I want you guys to tell me what you think it would be. Are we adding it or subtracting it if we're the German? We're adding it, right? So if the dollar goes up while I own a dollar denominated asset, when I go to sell it in T plus 1, I'm going to convert it back to euros, and I'm going to be ahead of the game because the dollar appreciated against the euro. So we're going to add dollar appreciation. Or, what else could the German do? So this is one option, is to look at dollar assets. What else could the German do? Assets of their country, right? So we could look at the foreign interest rate. We're really just assuming the world's got two parties here. So we've got the interest rate on foreign assets, the way we've been doing the notation.
Is it not? Never mind. I was thinking this would be domestic for the German, right?
Right. Yeah. So this is, yeah. So now the German can just buy foreign denominated assets, earn that, and then once it pays out, they don't have to convert anything because they already live in Germany, right? So that would be there. So this is just buy foreign assets, which is domestic to them. This is where it gets slightly confusing, but yes, I think you said it right. Okay, so the relative rate of return for the German. So the relative
Would you
RD.
Still, would you still add on the appreciation, the dollar appreciation?
No, they never bought it. So they live in Germany, they own euros, they bought a euro denominated financial asset. Once it paid out, they still had euros, they still live in Germany, so that's all they get.
So the second part is just return of dollar assets and your exposure to interest rate for foreign.
Up here, we bought I'm a German, remember I'm a German, bought a dollar denominated financial asset, earned that rate of return. Once it paid out, I had to convert back to my currency to convert it back to euros. So if the dollar appreciated, I got 6% on this, plus the dollar appreciated 2%, so my overall investment paid out 8. Okay? Then we're going to do a couple more. So let me just get the relative domestic return. So if I take the dollar return minus the foreign return plus the dollar appreciation, I can now think of how did I do? How did I do with my choice of going with this one or this one by looking at the relative return? If this number is negative, then I screwed up. I could have done better by choosing the other one, right? So we can look, we're just looking at one relative to the other. Chelsea? Did I see you?
So,
Okay.
wouldn't that basically turn out that way, like if there was an depreciation, so instead of putting on something, you would probably give you the negative relative return?
I'm not sure. Lydia, say that
Let's
again.
say the dollar depreciates.
Okay.
It says
Yeah.
so you have a minus. So
Right.
that's basically when you're going to get your negative is when there's depreciation.
Possibly, yes. Yeah. If
Unless
unless there's
interest rates are
default or
different.
something, yeah. Assuming the default, yes. If we're talking the bond world, so. But we could be talking about any other types of assets too. So this is just generalized kind of rate of return. Michael?
And you're saying, how did we do, this isn't necessarily like a concept that you can use in hindsight, though?
No,
Because
you
you're
can.
okay.
You can use it. The way it's worded here, it's not. But yeah, in hindsight, we would just what did I get, and what did that end up being? Yes. Yep. So, I think maybe if I understand what you're saying, if this is an E, then this would probably be an E as well. Is that kind of what you're thinking? So for the American, let's look at what they face. The rate of return on foreign assets, if they decide to go that, in terms of dollars. So I buy a German bond and I earn I. However, if the dollar had appreciated during this time, what's going to happen, John? Subtract it out. So whoops, I put it in, it's not necessarily a whoops, by the way, is what we're going to kind of learn, but I bought the foreign bond, they paid me out in euros, I converted it back. If the dollar appreciated, then I actually lost money in the exchange part of the equation, and I need to subtract that off. Or, of course, the American can just earn the domestic interest rate. Buy American. And the relative return for the American is equal to the domestic minus, and this is where we can be a little, I'll do this one in 2 steps, the foreign rate, which is what we just did, get caught up because this is the aha proof moment here. So to solve that one, we distribute that minus sign through, and we get ID minus IF plus dollar appreciation. Over here? Yeah. Nope. We just kind of work through the same logic here. Because we use the foreigners, this switches around on how it works with them. The appreciation of the dollar is added in one case, subtracted in the other. And so the main point is that whether you're an American, or German, looks like my red is about killed here. Whether you're American or German, you face the same relative return. I want to get one last thing in here before we wrap up. We've got 2 minutes left. So that's kind of the key thing with interest rate parity, and that's why. Because, and one of the reasons we get this, and the last thing I want to put up, is through capital mobility. You know, for economists, if we have resources being able to be moved around, that increases efficiency. And in this case, we have that type of mobility. Investors, because of the international marketplaces that have evolved over time, the institutions that we have, investors are free to roam the globe for the highest return on financial securities. And therefore, we expect discipline, my new word that I'm trying to get into the field, instead of free markets, market discipline to yield this concept. And this is really the expression. Domestic interest rates for dollar-denominated financial assets should equal my foreign counterparts due to arbitrage. My interest rate that I can get from a foreign investment minus, and I'm going to write out the full formula one last time here, minus my dollar appreciation figure. So if I'm roaming the globe through arbitrage opportunities and lots of competition and investors, I should expect these two expressions to be equal, which then through a little bit of algebraic manipulation gives you, that'll let you do on your own. You can solve for the spot rate today, and the spot rate equals the forward rate over IF minus ID plus 1. So let's take a deep breath. Michael, we're not done yet. If IF increases, what happens to the dollar? If the interest rate on foreign investments increases, the dollar depreciates, right? This denominator is getting bigger, this one's going to get smaller. If, on the flip side, domestic interest rates rise on dollar-denominated financial assets, that's going to cause the exchange rate to appreciate. So we get that, and if you go back to your shifter list, that it's the same thing we just did. So you get that in that expression. Okay, call it a day there.